Welcome! I am so thrilled you're here. Today, we're exploring a framework that is honestly often deeply misunderstood. When most people hear the word permaculture, they immediately picture this lush, maybe slightly wild vegetable garden, or perhaps a really cleverly designed composting system. But it is actually so much more than that. Permaculture is literally a holistic, ethically grounded design science. It was created back in the 1970s by Bill Mollison and David Holmgren, and it's essentially a whole way of thinking that models human settlements and our economic relationships on the resilient patterns of natural ecosystems. So in this explainer, we're going to completely unpack the very foundation of this entire philosophy. Okay, let's dive right into this explainer with what is essentially the prime directive of permaculture. This is a powerful, incredibly direct call to personal responsibility from co-founder Bill Mollison. Think about it. Before we can even start designing sustainable landscapes or resilient communities, we first have to agree on a baseline of ethics. We have to make the decision that we are responsible for the future. Because without this grounding, any design is, well, it's really just clever gardening.
To understand how permaculture truly works, we're going to cover 5 key areas today. First, earth care. Second, people care. Third, the evolution of the third ethic. Fourth, setting limits and fair share. And finally, number 5, how these all connect into a systemic feedback loop. All right, let's jump into part 1, earth care and natural capital. Now, earth care isn't just about the classic environmentalist idea of doing less harm. It goes way beyond that. It's about actively regenerating the biosphere and ensuring the survival of natural systems. To put that into perspective, here's a wild number for you. A single teaspoon of healthy soil can contain more living organisms than there are people on the entire planet. If you're operating within a purely mechanical worldview, you might create systems that rely heavily on inputs and just churn out unused waste. But an ecological worldview, one that is firmly rooted in earth care, actually aligns our human aspirations with the evolution of those incredibly dense, complex natural systems.
So the absolutely crucial point here is that earth care requires our interactions with nature to be governed by what Mollison called necessitous use. Basically, we take what we truly need, but we deliberately leave space for ecosystems to thrive. It's a massive shift from a posture of domination to one of deep, engaged cooperation. It means we are actively working to restore damaged landscapes, we're valuing biodiversity, and we're acknowledging that when we lose plant and animal species, we are literally losing our own chances for survival.
Moving on to part 2, people care and communal permanence.
This brings us to a really fascinating concept Mollison referred to as communal permanence. The reality is, you simply cannot have a permanent agriculture without a stable social order that actively looks after self, kin, and community. We basically have to start treating all of humanity as part of our extended family. Because a population that actually values every individual's contribution, that group is far more likely to thrive than one that's based purely on cutthroat competition.
People Care focuses heavily on designing systems that support holistic human needs. We're talking intellectually, physically, and socially. Yes, it's absolutely about ensuring equitable access to the basics, like clean water and healthy food. But it goes further. It extends to providing meaningful work, which is often called right livelihood in permaculture circles. The whole goal is to create an environment where people don't just scrape by and survive, but genuinely flourish through cooperative relationships.
That brings us to part 3, the third ethic's evolution. Now, this is where things get really interesting. While earth care and people care are universally agreed upon and, relatively straightforward to grasp, the third ethic has sparked this fascinating, multi-decade philosophical debate among practitioners. The way this specific ethic is named and how it's taught actually varies wildly depending on who you talk to.
You can see this paradigm shift incredibly clearly right here. On the left side, we have Mollison's original wording, straight from his 1988 designer's manual. But on the right, you see how the movement has adapted and evolved the phrasing over time. It's shifted to reflect a much broader, more inclusive understanding of justice and equity.
Mollison's overarching theory originally was highly pragmatic. The idea was that by placing conscious limits on our own consumption, any excess we have can be deliberately channeled right back into earth care and people care. He wanted to break the cycle of endless accumulation and return humanity to a state of balance.
However, as we examine the source material impartially, we have to note that many critics within the community felt the original wording about limiting population carried some pretty dark overtones, reminding people of eugenics and colonial resource control. And that sparked a massive wave of reinterpretation. Tony Anderson coined fair share to directly address wealth distribution.
Starhawk brought in the concept of future care, drawing directly from the African permaculture school. Toby Hemingway liked reinvesting the surplus, and Heather Jo Flores prefers the term parity to address systemic social justice. So as you can see, it's a vibrant, ongoing debate about how we can best articulate fairness.
Which leads us perfectly into part 4, setting limits and fair share.
The concept of fair share asks us to fundamentally alter our relationship with resources. It asks us to make a choice: sufficiency over infinite growth. It literally requires us to look at our yields, and that could be food from a garden, financial wealth, or even our time and knowledge, and deliberately decide to share that surplus rather than hoard it.
Many practitioners point out that this ethic directly challenges the dominant global paradigm of capitalistic accumulation. In the literature, advocates discuss how fair share proposes that we limit our personal wealth and instead view our surplus as a tool to redirect resources to marginalized communities or damaged ecosystems. It completely replaces a scarcity mindset with a culture of radical sharing and communal abundance.
And finally, part 5, the systemic feedback loop. I want you to think of this like a beautiful watercolor flowchart. The third ethic acts as this absolutely critical feedback loop. Step 1 is limiting our consumption to generate a surplus. Step 2 is identifying what that surplus actually is. Maybe it's extra vegetables, maybe it's financial capital, or maybe it's just your free time. And then step 3 is funneling that surplus right back into the first 2 ethics. It literally takes the energy of the system and loops it back around to regenerate the whole thing. And that creates this incredibly elegant, systemic relationship. These ethics, they aren't just a static checklist you tick off and forget about. They are a continuous, self-regulating engine of sustainability. Earth care generates the natural resources. People care sustains the human labor, the intellect, and the community well-being. And the third ethic regulates the entire system by capturing any excess and feeding it right back into the base. It's a perfectly closed-loop ethical engine.
By weaving these 3 ethics together, permaculture moves so far beyond just being a set of clever farming techniques. It elevates into a comprehensive design for resilient, sustainable, and equitable human living. It shows us that a permanent agriculture is the absolute prerequisite for a permanent culture.
It's a profound shift in perspective, isn't it? The ethics of permaculture invite us to step out of isolation and into deep, reciprocal relationships with the earth and with each other. So, I want to leave you with this final, provocative thought to carry with you today. In a world built on rampant consumption, how will you set limits and redistribute your own surplus? Take a real look at your life, find your surplus, and think about how you can feed it back into the loop. Thank you so much for exploring this with me.